with you. Yes, you had a full head of black hair when we started doing this. Okay, the theme of this year's festival is They Tried to Warn Us. And if you thought you were coming to North City today to just watch old tough guy movies, there'll be some of that. But there's also a string of message pictures to start us off today. So you will be getting some socially conscious cinema along with your noir. Crossfire is a movie that some people think of it mainly as a message picture and not really a film noir, but I can guarantee you that there was not a single scene in this movie that in script form opened with exterior day. Not one. I mean, this entire thing takes place in the dead of night, and it is the most nocturnal looking film of the 1940s, probably. Its backstory is really fascinating. So Richard Brooks, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Richard Brooks, who would become a very, very prominent writer, producer, director in Hollywood. But in the early 1940s, he was a Marine. And when he was in the Marine Corps, he wrote the novel that this movie is based on. It was called The Brick Foxhole. And it was very controversial for the time because it revolved around many things. The film version of the novel kind of streamlines everything into one narrative thread. But the main incident in the book was the beating death of a homosexual. And when the novel was bought to be turned into a movie, that was not something that Hollywood was going to touch at the time. But Dory Sherry, the producer of this film, he was the head of production at RKO, which I called at that time the House of Noir. Not that I was alive at that time. I mean, that time in RKO's history. It was the House of Noir, largely because of Dory Sherry's production philosophy, which was to make hard-hitting pictures for not a lot of money, which is what noir is sort of all about. You can produce these things pretty much on the cheap and get a lot of visual impact and a lot of human drama in them without breaking the bank. And that was Dory Sherry's job as the production chief at RKO. He knew that Darryl Zanuck over at 20th Century Fox was making a film of The Gentleman's Agreement with Elia Kazan, which was to be the first film directly facing the issue of anti-Semitism. And Dory Sherry read The Brick Foxhole, said, well, we can't actually make this about a gay guy being beaten to death, so we'll have him make it a Jew. And he was determined to beat Gentleman's Agreement into theaters with a genre picture as opposed to a prestigious A picture like Gentleman's Agreement, starred Gregory Peck and John Garfield and Celeste Holm. It was a big, lavish, 20th Century Fox production. So there was this team that had come together at RKO. They had made a picture in 1944 called Murder My Sweet, which was one of the seminal films in the film noir movement. And that was written by John Paxton, based on a Raymond Chandler novel, obviously, Farewell My Lovely, and produced by Adrian Scott and directed by Edward Dmytryk. Now, Adrian Scott and Edward Dmytryk had both been card-carrying members of the Communist Party of the USA. And that was going to eventually get them in very, very hot water. But they produced this movie, as Todd and I were discussing beforehand. Don't get too excited that we said it was set in Washington, D.C., because this entire film is made on the backlots in Hollywood. And you'll see a lot of artificial city streets and things in this movie. But the film was a revelation when it came out and won all sorts of humanitarian awards. And Dory Sherry accomplished what he set out to do, which was kind of undercut Darryl Zanuck a little bit. But Gentleman's Agreement won all the Oscars. Interesting side note is that one of the stars of this picture, and it really was a career-making performance for Robert Ryan. He was also in the Marine Corps, and he and Richard Brooks were together at Camp Pendleton in California at one point after the novel had been published. And Robert Ryan said to him, you know, if they ever make a movie out of this, tell them that I have to play Montgomery. he says, I know those sons of bitches really well. And so Richard Brooks put in the call to Adrian Scott and said, you guys have Bob Ryan under contract, right? I mean, he is Monty Montgomery. You need to cast him in this film. And so he was cast against the two other Bobs, Robert Young and Robert Mitchum. And Robert Mitchum was not yet the big star that he was going to be. He hadn't made Out of the Past yet. He had made the story of G.I. Joe. But they're all tremendous in this film, augmented by some of the most unusual performances you're ever going to see. The fabulous Gloria Graham was nominated for a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her performance in this film. And she is playing opposite an actor named Paul Kelly, who has one of the weirdest small bit roles in this film. I love it so much. It is completely inexplicable. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but afterwards when we're in the lobby mingling and stuff, remind me to tell you the story, the backstory of Paul Kelly, which is the most noir thing imaginable. And the fact that he appears in this movie at this time in his career is kind of miraculous to begin with. So it is really a strong film and a very, very serious film. And I'm frankly very excited to see so many hands go up among people who have not seen this movie before. So, thank you, Mr. Hitchcock, because this is the 75th anniversary of this film's release. And thank you very much for taking this beautiful, sunshiny, glorious day and deciding to spend it with this miserable company you're about to meet in the dead of night in Washington, D.C. in World War II America. So here is the 75th anniversary of Crossfire.